Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule and your day to come and be a part of this conversation under the Siimee Q&A experience. So with me, I have the honor of having Cornell Verdeja-Woodson, who is a DE&I expert. He's a thought leader within diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just a tremendous person in general. I had the pleasure of connecting with him a few months back because of his work and being very inspired by his work and his perspective when it comes to how to build more inclusive workspaces for employers and for job seekers and just for companies as a whole. So I want to introduce Cornell to everyone. Hi, Cornell.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I've been so eager to have a conversation with you. Would love to just kind of dive really into your background. So if you can walk us through your journey, maybe from where you were born, your hometown, what some of your passions are and what led you to pursue the path that you're currently on as a professional and as an individual.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Camden, New Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia. Oldest of five kids. Well, four at the time. The fifth didn't come until I was a sophomore in college, but I'm the oldest of five kids. Mom was a single parent. Dad was around, but not always mentally and emotionally present, right? And so experience having to grow up faster than one might want to as a child and taking on responsibilities. And I think that, and I share that because it's a big part of who I am today as an adult. And I think a big part of how I've been able to get to where I am, and really instilling that kind of responsibility in me. Have lived in so many different places, as a grown-up. I've lived most of my adult life in New York. I went to Ithaca College. I worked at Cornell University for a number of years, worked at NYU after I got my master's, did Teach for America, taught 9th through 12th grade English for a number of years, and spent most of my career in education, leading DEI work for different campuses and institutions and things of that sort. And then made a pivot into the corporate tech space about 3 years ago now, actually, and just realizing that I feel like I can make a bigger impact in this space, even though it's still hard, make a bigger impact in this space on the world at large. And so just really excited. And I love this work. And I think that's what really drives me is the idea of being able to create better spaces for people. So currently work as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Headspace, or Headspace Health now. That's who we are. But I'm also the founder and CEO of a small boutique consulting firm named Brave Trainings as well.
Yes, that's awesome. And, so with that, just to give you a brief background about myself. So I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, to a single parent. My mother raised my sister and I. And one of my struggles in life was realizing that even within my underrepresented community, I was still marginalized because I knew at a young age that I was different. I identify as bisexual queer. Now I'm married to my husband, of Michael, of almost 5 years in January, which is amazing.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And congratulations to you as well.
Yes, our 2-year wedding anniversary is coming up in December.
I love that. That's so amazing. But I would love to know from you, from your perspective and your experience, Cornell, how was it for you growing up when we're just self-identifying? Because again, within our own marginalized community, we ourselves, people that are different from the majority of the community, can feel marginalized and ostracized, similar to what people feel like when they're in the workspace, when they feel marginalized and ostracized for who they are authentically. So I would love to know, what was that like for you growing up?
Yeah, it was very difficult for me growing up. And there were often times where I felt like there was going to be no end to it either. I did not understand what sexuality was and what it meant to be gay and a part of the LGBTQIA plus community. I just, knew that I thought that people were beautiful, and both women and men, right? And I didn't necessarily have a name for it, but all my peers did. And I didn't necessarily see what they saw. They saw what they might call femininity in me. I didn't play sports. I didn't talk about sports. I didn't talk about girls the way other boys did. And not to mention, I also was a really, I was what they probably call the teacher's pet. So they had this image of what it meant to be gay and things of that sort. And again, I didn't see it. And so I was bullied a lot. I was also gay bashed at one point by a group of boys while the security officers looked on and laughed and allowed it to happen. And all the while going, why? Right? Like, what is going, I've done nothing, right? What is it that people are seeing? It wasn't until very later in life that I started to understand sexuality. And that, in fact, I identified as a gay individual, right? And even that is still, that term for me, queer is actually stronger for me, because I dated a girl in high school, and it wasn't a situation where you're kind of like, oh, I'm going to do this so I can hide and no one suspect me. Like, no, I was very much in love with this individual, right? Both from a platonic and sexual and romantic way, right? And so I know that sexuality is much more fluid than just the limited walls that we put around these labels. But again, I didn't understand that other part of me, but being bullied, just, it was rough. It was very rough, and it impacted how I saw myself. And it also caused me to limit myself in many ways. And I think it's a big part of why I have trust issues today, right? And that's for me and my therapist to unpack. But, just really, because, so many people have done so much to you that you never thought would do those things to you. And so you learn to put up this wall, right, that doesn't allow people in unless they pass certain tests. And it impacts me even today. And so that healing is still being done, but growing up, it was very difficult navigating those particular spaces.
I agree. And I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing your experience with myself and our viewers. Just to relate, I identified at a young age as straight, but I struggled. I knew that there was more layers to who I am and my identity and my attraction of different individuals. But I was that jock. I was the popular kid. I was the athlete. I played sports. I was involved in organizations. I was that typical guy that you see in TV and films, except I wasn't a bully. I was not that, thankfully. But at the same time, I felt like I bullied myself because I ridiculed myself for the feelings that were natural that I had, and the attractions that I had, and the confliction that I had about being a Black man, or a Black young man at the time, growing up in the South, growing up in a Christian household, growing up in a Black Christian household. It was very conflicting for me. But, in terms of biases, I realized at a young age that even myself, being marginalized, I have my own bias outlooks on different cultures and different people of different backgrounds. And I realized it's almost just, whether it's more so when it's conscious, not when it's unconscious, but when it's a conscious bias, it really comes from a place of hurt. It's like hurt people, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally. And there's a root cause for that pain, right? Whether it's feeling unappreciated, undervalued, not good enough. There was a hurt root there. So I would love to kind of dive into, at what point in your life, Cornell, did you realize that like systematic bias was a major problem? And how have you been able to like own your voice and really create the awareness and the change around this issue, like even with your current company that you have started?
Absolutely. And I want to, something that you said just sparked something for me. There's I think he's a philosopher, but his name is Paulo Freire. He's been gone for quite some time, but he wrote this book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And it was originally written in Portuguese, but it's been translated into tons of different languages since then. And he talks about, there's one chapter in the book where he talks about the oppressed in their quest to gain power will step on other oppressed people in order to get there, right? Because that is what we're taught to do, right? That there's not enough room at the top, there's not enough room at the table, and so I've got to make room for me, and so I'm going to step on these other people in order to get a piece of the pie for myself, right? And so we're taught this scarcity myth very, very early on. I didn't begin to understand even race probably until college. Right? I remember being in college, because I had been so used to being in white spaces. I went to a predominantly white high school. Even though my middle school was predominantly Black, all my teachers were Black as well. Even Black people perpetuated the narrative that what was happening to us primarily was because of something our parents did or didn't do,
Correct.
right? I definitely had some very empowering teachers who knew better, but there was also that thin line of kind of like, see, that's why y'all can't have nothing, right? That kind of thing. And so it was embedded in me that like, oh, this is a personal choice that folks are making. And so I remember being in college and saying that, and one of my friends were like, we need to teach you, and got me together real fast. In fact, it was all my friends from New York City. They were all like, so no. And that was the first time I really was introduced to critical race theory and just all of that information that, no, this is a system that was created so that we could not have a choice, whether we fought hard or worked hard or not, we still won't have a choice. So college was definitely it. And from there on, I think also my Teach for America experience also highlighted it even more, because now here I am on a different side of the table as a educated individual, access to a certain amount of financial freedom, right? I was still in debt, all of a sudden wasn't making a lot of money, but still had a salary, I had a job, I had a career. And I saw the impact from a different angle, also how I was perpetuating it too. So college and definitely Teach for America really colored my lens of like, this is what the world really looks like. And I think has created sort of, what you see today, and why I'm so adamant about this work and engaging it and creating real systemic change that leads to liberation, not, collective liberation, not just liberation for some of us.
I love that. And I have to agree. For me, college, I went to the University of Kentucky and majored in social work. And college really did open up my lens to the world and what is truly reflective of the world in terms of different diverse individuals, backgrounds, cultures, and people being at an age as young adults in college, like actually diving into understanding who they are and accepting who they are. And that really helped me gain the confidence to really step into my own and be proud of the person that I am holistically in all areas that make up Rhett Lindsay. But it was a challenge, and it was definitely a challenge trying to do that in high school, because my high school was a predominantly Black high school, and my college experience was predominantly white. So I had came from one world and went to another, and I carried certain insecurities from one world into another, but I also gained some certain insecurities in this new world as being the minority in this white establishment, and trying to find my footing, trying to find my place, which led to me learning how to code switch. And then being confused on, well, who am I? Like what is my personality? What version of me is the appropriate version to present? Whether I'm in the workspace, whether I'm in classes, whether I'm interviewing, whether I'm socially out. Like, I was very lost, Cornell, and my identity. And it took me a while near the tail end of my college experience to finally grasp that. So, in terms of the work experience, I'm sure, as you can probably relate to, people of color, or just anyone that's from an underrepresented group, a lot of times have to code switch or change something about themselves, either to stand out on their resumes or to interview, or even when they're hired, they have to have this completely different presentation of themselves to not cause disruption, to not cause any type of uncomfortability within the workspace amongst their colleagues. It's stressful. It's like a second job. It's really a second job, and it's unnecessary stress. And it's all, again, like you said earlier, to help advance ourselves, because we don't have a lot of the resources that were naturally handed to us. So us, people of color being survivors over just generations and generations, I really feel that the code switching mentality is not so much an insecurity of why we do it. It's almost like a survival tactic to advance. So I would love to know, especially within in a white majority workspace. So I would love to know your perspective on that experience, if you've ever experienced what that feels like to have to code switch, or if you've seen colleagues or know people that have, and what that experience has been like for them.
I mean, I think that there's a common experience, particularly amongst us people of color, and definitely amongst us Black people, of being younger and being at home and having our mom or our parents, particularly our mom though, answer the phone, go, hello. I'm like, who is that? Like, my mom don't talk like that. Why is she talking like that? Right? She's putting on that professional, voice for whoever's on the other side, right? And then you can tell when it was a, someone official, whether it was a bill collector or whatever, or if it was family, because we go, oh, hey, girl, right? Yeah. And then go back to the way I understood how my mom spoke, right? But that was the first time, and I didn't have language for it. It was called code switching, right? But I remember just going like, why does she do that when she was home? Why does her voice go up an octave? Yeah. And so you start picking up on that. So at 100%, code switching has been a huge part of my experience and I love that you pointed out that it's about survival. It's not about necessarily my desire to assimilate and my desire to be closer to whiteness, right? But it is about surviving and being able to get access to, jobs and spaces that ultimately give me the resources that I need in order to take care of my family, right? It becomes a thing that you have to do a lot of time. Now, I'm not, what I am is speaking out against it and saying that we shouldn't have to do it, but I understand, many people can understand why we do it, because we don't want to have to deal with the backlash of what it means to be able to be ourselves authentically, if that's not us, right, in these spaces, because there's a direct correlation between having to code switch and our mental health, right? We are essentially become two separate people when we do that. We do that as gay Black people, right? Yeah. So, when every time when I had hair, when I would go to the barbershop, I knew I had to sit and act and walk in a certain way because I didn't want any attention towards me. Again, I didn't know that what gay meant or what it was, but I knew that there was something about how I walked or how I presented myself that made people target me. And so I got more masculine, right? That's code switching, but it's all about survival to avoid the oftentimes verbal, sometimes physical and emotional attack that people can have on you just by you walking into a space. I don't know that I've ever met a single person that doesn't have that common experience of like, we know what that code switching is, we know what it sounds like, and we know why we do it.
Yeah. And it's really fascinating, Cornell, because I can recall working in certain spaces professionally in the recruiting space, because that's my background, and interviewing, I can recall myself just being a more highlighted version of who I am to make, because I always was interviewed by white counterparts, and having to make sure that I made them comfortable. Right. It was always seeming as if I wanted to make sure that they were comfortable and not so much make sure that I'm comfortable, even just as a candidate. Like, I'm taking the time out of my day to interview. They should be interested in me just as much as I'm interested in them. And the fact that I cared more about making them comfortable than myself, that's very alarming. And I think that's something that a lot of people of color experience and probably work through to gain, again, a footing and to grow professionally in their careers. And so one thing that Siimee aims to do is to really create a recruiting platform for job seekers to be able to have equal footing and opportunities to different positions at companies without a lot of these front-facing, very problematic biases that occur at the initial stages of the interview process, as well as just through the interview process all the way up to offer stages. Right. People are judged on their names. And in today's time with social media, you can easily reference someone's name and cross-reference that to a social media page, their professional networking website. It's just so much access now on the internet that you can have these unconscious bias that will influence your decision on what steps you want to take with someone, if you even decide to take a step with them. Yeah. And it's really challenging. And so what happens then, Cornell, is that you have people say, okay, well, if my name is more foreign to the country I'm from, let me angelicalize my name to a more American name. That happens a lot with our Asian community, where they change their names to a more angelicalized name. Or if someone's profile photo is reflective of who they are from a cultural standpoint, they might think that having a more professional looking profile photo will gain more attention.
Black women experience that most often,
Yes.
right? Where
Yes.
where they're hair natural, they straighten it when they know they have to go for an interview, just so they can seem appealing to folks, right? Yeah, absolutely.
And why is that important? That's the one thing I've always been alarmed by, Cornell, is the fact that those things matter when they shouldn't. They're so impactful that, I mean, they literally can be a decision breaker for an employer on if they fit this idea of the culture at this established organization or company. And so I would love to hear from you as an expert in your field. And this is, I'm sure, a major issue that you're tackling, not only for your company, but also for what you currently do. I would just love to know, what are your stance and your perspective on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it matters because that is the system or systems that operate our society, right? That is, I mean, that dates back to as far as we can go back, that the closer to whiteness you are, the more acceptable and more appealing you are to people, right? We see that in every single industry. We see it in fashion, we see it in film and TV, we see it in the workplace, right? And it's all tied in the system. And we haven't actually done, in my opinion, we haven't done a good job at, checking those biases, checking that system that taught us that that's what appealing or professional looks like, right? We have been having a lot of conversations around the term professionalism. And again, it has everything to do with the proximity to whiteness. And without being willing to address that, right, and deal with all the feelings and emotions that come up with addressing that, all of this that we're talking about has everything to do with how we try to get people to be more like white people. We're not going to deal with it because we're digging, but not digging in the right areas to find the actual root cause of how we got here. This is not to say that all white people are a problem, but the concept of whiteness is an issue, because even black people of color can perpetuate whiteness and white supremacy, right? Yes. And so that's super critical. One of the things that we do, particularly in our hiring practices, is one, we focus on developing inclusive hiring practices, not diversity recruiting.
Yes, correct.
And one of my colleagues, Ulysses Smith, he's the head of diversity over at Blend. He put a post up on LinkedIn recently about this, about having a conversation about the term diversity recruiting, because that in itself is super othering. Yes. Right. And it just creates this whole different dynamic. But we have to have a conversation around what does inclusive practices look like, how, and also demanding from senior leaders that hiring managers engage in talent planning.
Yes.
Because, right, if I don't know what I'm looking for, if I don't take time to be intentional about what I'm looking for, that's where the bias creeps in. Yes. Right. And that's where all that socialization I've been getting since the day I was born starts creeping in about who is acceptable to join this team. And so having intentional moments where I can step back and go, is that really needed? Is that what you're looking for? Let's talk about how bias is showing up here. Without that kind of intentionality, we're never going to address it, which is why I always tell companies, you want to hire fast, but you don't want to give more resources, right? That ain't going to work. Yeah. It's not going to work. And so really we need to slow down a bit and really be intentional about how we plan and how we actually do our hiring to mitigate the bias that will no doubt impact our decision-making.
That's so true. And I love that you touched on the idea of diverse recruiting, because I think collectively, especially within corporate America and within tech, that term and that strategy, that strategic initiative is so skewed because it's coming from the higher ups, which is majority white-led leadership, executives, having this goal, which is great, to want to diversify and expand their workforce, but it's really almost narrow-minded, because a lot of times what happens is it's coming from a place of someone's skin color and their gender, and that's really about it. And most times it's people of color and women. And I think with that idea of diversity, and that's the approach that majority companies take, like you said, they're weeding out a whole pool of other prospects that are professionals that are just as qualified for the opportunity. And I was tasked back in certain positions that I had to have to find a Black female engineer, or find even I was sometimes like LGBT engineers. And I would always wonder, why am I tasked to just find specifically that? I think finding underrepresented talent, underrepresented professionals that encompass handicapped people, LGBTQ people, recent graduates, veterans. I mean, the list can go on and on of underrepresented groups. That is one thing, but then to have to narrowly target a selective person based on an assumption, again, of what we think they are, based on their profile photo, based on their educational background, based on their name, based on how they're front facing, presenting themselves. That's where the issue, I have a huge problem with that. And that was something that I absolutely experienced and was tasked to do in a lot of my recruiting efforts at these type of major tech companies or entertainment companies. And so I just, again, I appreciate your stance and your viewpoint, as well as your colleagues' stance and viewpoint on what you all are doing when it comes to inclusive recruiting and not diversity recruiting, because it has to be an inclusive experience to incorporate everyone.
And if we're doing it right, then we end up, in my opinion, building the right relationships with a broad base of people. What I will say, and what comes up for me as I was listening to you talk, what I will say though, is I do believe it is important for us to be specific about what we're looking for. What we do know is that companies have been focused on diversity for a long time. What we know who has benefited from those diversity efforts are white women, right? And so I think that when you're not specific about what you're looking for, you end up having that as a result, right? And we can look at many other initiatives from a societal level that were meant to serve particularly Black and brown people, but ended up only serving white women, right? Because we didn't have a specific focus. So when people come to me and go, well, I want to build a diverse team, I go, well, what does that mean? Well, I want people who are different. Well, who's missing from your team currently? Right? And without understanding and knowing what our teams look like, I don't know that Black people are the group that have the lowest representation on my team, and that in fact, everyone else is pretty well represented. And so I do think that there is a need to say, yes, we are looking for Black and Latinx people at Headspace. Has been our hiring goal for this year, because when we looked at our data, we saw that when compared to our talent pool, every other racial group was well represented compared to our talent pool, but our Black and Latinx were severely under par, right? However, we do it with an intersectional lens, to your earlier point, right? So I'm not just, not just focused on just Black people, just Latinx people, but I'm focused on Black and Latinx people at the intersection of sexual orientation, gender, disability, veteran status, right? Nationality, all that stuff, because Black people and Latinx people are everywhere. And for me, with that lens, helps us cast a wide net, right? That brings in all the other dimensions of diversity.
Yes, and also, and just to clarify for our viewers, what I was also trying to say is that it's not so much as it shouldn't be about looking at someone and making an assumption on their skin color of what race or gender they are. And I absolutely vouch for tapping into underrepresented groups of professionals to reach out to, like Cornell said. And with that, my goal is to really tap into different community organizations that a lot of people are members of. A lot of companies struggle with tapping into communities, different orgs, different unionships, different private groups, that you have a pool of people that identify with something that group is created for, because a lot of recruiting is fast paced. And so a lot of recruiters don't have the time to do those extra layer outreaches. And so they just go off of what's easy, what's fast, what's simple. And that's looking at someone, this person's this, and assuming that. And the one thing that I think is problematic about that, Cornell, is about that type of approach, is that people of color, we come in all shades.
Come on now.
I have a sister that is you would think that she could be presented probably as a Caucasian woman. You know, because my family, my background, I have white heritage, I have Black heritage, I have Native American. I am a mixture of different ethnicities and colors. And so I think it goes to this idea of, what does it mean to be Black? Right. What does that look like to a majority white recruiting team? You know, it's very interesting. So I love to, you know, talk about your background with you being the CEO of Brave Trainings. Tell us about what sparked you to create this company, this consulting company, and how is that going right now?
Everything. So what I love this. What sparked is everything we just talked about, right? My own personal experiences growing up, my personal experiences today, you know, and 6 years ago, because I started about 6 or 7 years ago. But then just wanting to really get in front of more people to say, like, here's another approach, a more equitable approach for how we actually do this work. And so for me, like what got me into the company, but also into DEI in general, was obviously most people who do this work, I find, get into it for a personal reason, right? Because they're a Black person, they're a person of color, they are a you know, LGBTQ, they're a woman, person with disability, etc. But I think what sustains me in the work is knowing that I'm not just representing my identities, but I'm also helping to lift up the voices of communities that I'm not a part of. So my trans siblings, right? My trans colleagues, people with disabilities, you know, all those groups that I'm not a part of that are also a part of historically excluded groups. I'm also helping to create spaces that are safer for them as well. And that to me is really important. And it's going really well, actually. I've been busier than ever. The pandemic, you know, and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade really sparked something serious in a lot of folks. There was definitely much more work at the very top of it, but like everything, well, not everything. I think DEI has a particular thing where it ebbs and flows. People oftentimes ask me, well, why don't you just go out and do your business full time? I go, to me, it's not sustainable, because these companies will be really serious about it and then it drops, right?
Trendy.
I got a mortgage and a whole family to take care of. And that's a problem, right? Yeah. There's no sustained commitment to doing equity work. It matters when they think it needs to, from a PR perspective, or we can't be the only one not doing it perspective. And then all of a sudden, when no one else is talking about it as much, it gets put on the back burner, which is not how DEI work should be done. But again, going well, having very honest conversations with people. I've also stepped into a very different level of confidence in who I am as a DEI professional.
Talk about that. Why is that?
Yeah, I imagine if you Google me, you might see a little LinkedIn post that I shared a couple of weeks ago, where I'm much more unafraid to be honest and say what needs to be said without the code switching. Yes. And I recognize the privilege that I have in being able to do that, right? I make a certain amount of money, I have a certain amount of savings that I know I got me a safety net, that if I ever get decide that somebody doesn't want to hire me or they want to fire me, I know that I'm going to be fine, right? Yeah. And so I want to recognize the privilege in being able to be bold and be authentic in that way. But I'm just my tolerance level for the bull crap it's depleted. It's gone. Yeah. And I'm just tired of not saying what needs to be said, that ultimately I think can lead to the type of change that we actually need. And so being honest with the right people. So when I notice things are not the way they should, and I say should, not the way they could be, or whatever, that way they should, I call that out. And I'm not disrespectful, right? No. I'm not out of pocket, but I'm direct. And I don't care necessarily how people receive that, but not people go, well, I'm not used to people being so direct. I know, because we don't live in a society that values directness.
They're not used to people of color being direct.
From certain people, because other folks, white men and white women, can be very direct all day, right? And so I know I stopped caring about, and it's weird, it kind of just clicked. I woke up one morning and was just like, I'm going to, say what needs to be said. That particular LinkedIn post was a black, and I think that post is what really took me over the edge. It wasn't a calculated post. I blacked out. I don't even remember picking up my phone to write the message and press post, right? I was so triggered by something, by the experience of being a Black gay man, doing this work, both internally and externally, living in this world, right? And also the experiences of Black trans people, Black trans women, and people with disabilities and things of that sort, that I just broke, right? And it was that moment that I just realized I've got to be more direct and more honest. Because when you look back at our history, the people who have made the most impact were the people who were direct and honest. And it wasn't easy. They unfortunately didn't always live to see the impact of their honesty and their bravery. But it happens. And I'm not going to sit here and lie about or sugarcoat or beat around the bush about what needs to be said. It needs to be said, because what you will never be able to say about Cornell is that he didn't tell me.
Yeah. And you're a friend of mine. And when I saw that post, I knew that something had to bother you to be able to speak authentically and in the true authentic truth that you did.
Yes.
And it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't sugarcoated. And I appreciate and I really value and respect that you had the sense and the confidence in yourself to be able to be authentic in your voice with that post. It's very rare. I mean, even myself, I'll be honest, I don't know if I'm even in a place like that where I could be that honest about the issues that not only that I'm seeing or that I'm dealing with firsthand with my own experiences. And I think what you did helped set a standard in terms of showing people like that are reflective of you and I and other underrepresented groups that it's now time to live in our truth, live in our perspective, live in our experiences, and be vocal about that unapologetically.
Absolutely.
Because it's
unapologetic about our needs.
Yes.
Well, right. I mean, we're seeing this with the great resignation that people across the dimension of diversity are saying, like, I'm no longer going to accept less than what I know I'm worth. And not just from a financial compensation standpoint, but in like, you're not going to have me working until 10 o'clock at night. I want certain amount of PTO. I want certain amount of caregiver benefits. Like, I know what I need in order to thrive and do my best work. If you won't provide it, I'm out. Yeah. And I think also particularly people of color are really coming into that. Like, no, I got choices. I'm not going to sit here and be disrespected over and over and over again and given the carrot and stick treatment of like, yep, next year and next year and next year. Guess what? I can be gone today. And I think that there's a generation of people who look at that and go, see, y'all don't know how to stay put, or you ain't got no loyalty or like that. It's like, no, but it's not. We learned from y'all what y'all went through. We don't want to put up with that. I don't want to look back at 80 years old and realize that I didn't live my life to the fullest and do what I needed to do because I was worried about staying put somewhere, right? And that's just not our generation, right?
Compromising your integrity.
Exactly. And I respect the generation that did that because I understand what that was about, right? Yeah. So that's not, there's no tea, no shade on that, right? It's just about recognizing that things are different now and we have more options, and I'm not going to sit around and continue being disrespected. I'm going to go find what I'm looking for. Yeah,
no, I appreciate that, Cornell. And I have one question I would love to have you talk about. So a while back, you did an interview where you were asked about your perspective on professionals that work within the DEI space who were not people of color. And I loved your response to it. And I think it's an important topic because as most people are aware, people that work within corporate America and DEI spaces are people of color or are women. And sometimes, in just my opinion, it can feel like it's an easy thing for white executives to place someone of color in those roles and feel like job well done, like I did my part, right? Whether that person was hired because of their skin color or gender, or whether they were hired because they're just qualified for the position. I think that there is becoming a trend on what is the core of why this person's in this seat, coming from the executive decision makers at the top. So I would love to hear if you can expand upon the answer that you gave when it came to professionals that are in the DEI space who are not people of color. I will open up the floor to you for that.
Yeah, and I forget who I did this interview with, but I remember it very well. For me, I think, you know, what has gotten us to a place where most of the professionals in this work, particularly are women of color, is because, right, we naturally gravitate to this work because we want to see that's been the history, right? Like, we want to see this change, and so we step up and we work to get it done, right? And Black women of color in particularly always get it done, right? So that's one leg of why I think that happens, because we gravitate towards it. But then, as to what you were saying earlier too, it tends to be the role that they feel for some reason feel that we're the most qualified to do, and it's the only role that they see us actually being in, right? But why don't we have more people of color as your chief technology officers and your chief product officers and your chief people officers and your chief financial officers? Why don't you also see us as viable options for those roles as well? I think that we need more, and this is a complex thing, because I think on one end, we know that we need more, you know, to stick to the concept of race, we know we need more white people engaged in this work.
Yes.
We know that when, particularly research also shows too, that when, or there's been some studies that show this, that there's some correlation that when white cisgender heterosexual men step up and are advocates for diversity, that things happen, right? Because they have power, they have privilege. However, at the same time, though, we oftentimes too, when we see that same group wanting to be in these kind of leadership roles as a chief diversity officer or a head of DEI, we also still question them as well, right? So one it's like, nah, we need you to be in this role too, to pick up your portion of the work that has to get done. But at the same time, we also question, can you lead this work? And so I think our field has to actually have a discussion about what that looks like. Because I talked to a couple of people who do this work and they go, yeah, I walk into a room, people look at me like, what you doing? It's like, well, I'm answering the call and saying, like, as a white, you know, man or white straight cisgender man, I need to be also in these rooms, making sure that other people who look like me are hearing this work, right? But I also think it's about the way it gets done. So I think we need more voice. I think we need men talking about sexism. We need white people talking about racism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's the only way that it works, in my opinion.
I agree.
Right? If it's just us talking about it, they go, yup, there go Black people, you know, upset again and complain about what they ain't got, right? We need more people from privileged backgrounds also taking up the labor that it takes to get this work done. Yes,
I agree. And I had a former colleague of mine who was over the DE&I initiatives when I was working at Tinder, and she identifies as a female Caucasian, and she did amazing work. She was so collaborative, so insightful, so intentional with making sure she was creating programs and initiatives within Tinder at the time to be really inclusive, not only in hiring, but also in the retention of employees, making employees feel seen and heard and included in different activities, work functions. She was amazing at what she did. And again, she had a completely different background. She comes from a Caucasian background. And so, and she was in the D&I space. So it just shows you that it is possible. You know, people that are executives that are like hetero cis white men that have influence, have leadership, have power, access, more so than someone like myself, if they really are passionate and see the disconnect that's happening within the space, if they step up and provide their voice, provide their time, their input, it will really help spark change, the necessary change. But also, I would like to hold executives more accountable to see people of color, no matter what ethnicity they are, that we are capable of being in other leadership executive positions outside of just DE&I. You know, I really urge executives at companies to don't have that one person in the leadership role in D&I and think that that's it, that the job's done.
Right.
It's about
resource them and give them all that good stuff. One other thing that I want to say too is that I also believe, though, that DEI can be advanced from any seat.
Yes.
And right, so I
Yes.
get a lot of messages and meet with a lot of people who go, I want to get into DEI. And my first thing is, where are you now? Why do you want to get into DEI? Right? Because when I walk into a meeting as a DEI professional, people go, yup, there goes Cornell. Got to hear it. Right? They don't see me as an insider to their team. That's like engineering, right? I'm not an engineer. So when I go to talk to the chief technology officer and all the engineers, they go, yeah. You don't really understand our work. So they're not listening to me as well as they would listen to another engineer, right?
Yeah.
Who understands that world, can speak their language, right? And can help to advance DEI from that seat.
Wow.
Right? So I'm not even sure that we need more DEI, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this. I don't even think we need more DEI professionals. We need people who are leading through DEI in the seats that they're already in.
That's powerful. That's powerful. And I have to agree with you, Cornell. Okay. Last question for our conversation.
We can talk all day, right?
We can't talk all day, Cornell. I love talking.
I forgot we were recording.
Okay. All right. So if you were to become the CEO of the largest corporation in the world, what is the one message you would have for prospective and current employees?
Oh, what is the one message for current and prospective employees? What the gut reaction I'm having is, you belong here as you are. That's the message, right? And that comes from my Methodist church background, right?
Yes.
Come as you are, right? I'm hearing my old pastor say it right now. Come as you are. So I'm gonna use that because I feel like the universe is telling me that. But come as you are.
Yeah.
Because it's through coming as you are and bringing your authentic self that makes us the biggest and largest, most successful organization on the planet, because we're benefiting from the unique experience and perspective that everyone's bringing to the table to solve the world's most complicated problems.
Sir, on that note, I think you dropped the mic. I have no rebuttal or no comments to add to that. That's amazing, Cornell. My friend, I greatly appreciate you. Again, I admire who you are.
Thank you.
I admire the work you're doing. It's so impactful. It's so important, and it's so necessary. So no matter what, just keep being truthful and honest with yourself, as I know you will.
Yes.
But just keep headstrong, and just know that you are seen. You are appreciated, and you are worthy, and the work you're doing is not going unnoticed. And I just appreciate having you in my life. I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with our Siimee community. And man, I just look forward to just always staying in touch with you and just seeing the work, seeing you progress, seeing you excel and continue to excel in your career.
The feeling is absolutely mutual. I feel like this is our second time talking, but I feel like I'm connected to you in such a strong way. And so I just appreciate the community that I have with you. And thank you for the work that you're doing to create this platform that lifts up the voices that oftentimes are not voiceless, but are minimized. And so thank you for the work that you're putting in to make sure that people are hearing from people like us and people from other historically excluded groups. So likewise, you're doing the work, and I'm glad to be doing it with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Cornell. It's the teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work.
Come on now. I love it. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, listen, my friend, you enjoy the rest of your day. To our viewers, thank you so much for tuning into this wonderful conversation. Feel free to follow Cornell. Cornell, if you can give everyone your social media handles, please allow yourself to do that now.
Yeah, so I'm Cornell Verdeja-Woodson on LinkedIn, and then if you're into Instagram, it's me, Cornell. I don't have Facebook anymore, so it's just Instagram, and I'm also Cornell Verdeja-Woodson on Twitter as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Take care, everyone.